Sometimes the people who should stand with you won't. And sometimes the person who saves you is someone you never saw coming. Before we begin, I want to ask you something, and I really hope you'll leave your answer in the comments. Have you ever been let down by the people who were supposed to be there for you? Maybe family, maybe friends. When you needed them most, they walked away. If that's you, you're not alone. This is a story about that kind of loneliness, but it's also a story about unexpected grace. This is the story of Robert Harlan, a 67-year-old wheat farmer outside Hays, Kansas, who lost almost everything. His harvest, his savings, his family's respect, and found himself completely alone in the fight to save the only thing he had left. Until one person decided to look a little closer. Robert Harlan had been farming the same 1,500 acres in Ellis County, Kansas, for 43 years. His father farmed it before him, his grandfather before that. The land had been in the Harlan family since 1891. It wasn't just dirt and wheat. It was identity. It was legacy. It was the reason his name meant something in Hays. Robert married young, Sarah Brennan, a girl from a farm family 2 counties over. They raised 3 children on that land, 2 daughters, Amy and Claire, and a son, Jordan. Sarah kept the books. Robert worked the fields. They went to church on Sundays, county fairs in the summer, and harvest dinners in the fall. It was a good life, a simple life, a life built on work and trust and the belief that if you did things right, the land would take care of you. But 5 years ago, Sarah died. Lung cancer. It came fast, and it took her before Robert could even process what was happening. And when she was gone, so was the center of everything. Robert kept farming. It was all he knew how to do. But Sarah had been the one who managed the money, who kept the records, who knew which bills were due when. Robert tried to keep up with it, but he'd never been good with numbers. He paid what he could when he could. He assumed things were fine. They weren't. The kids had moved away years ago. Amy was in Wichita, working in real estate. Claire lived in Overland Park with her husband and 2 kids. Jordan had gone to Colorado after college and barely called. They came back for Sarah's funeral. They stayed a few days. Then they left again. Robert didn't blame them. They had their own lives. But he was alone now. Alone in the house. Alone in the fields. Alone with the bills piling up on the kitchen table. And that loneliness became dangerous when the rains didn't come. The summer of 2023 was brutal. Kansas is no stranger to drought, but that year was different. The heat came early and stayed late. By mid-June, the wheat fields that should have been golden and full were stunted and brown. Robert watched the sky every morning, hoping for clouds. None came. By harvest time, he knew he was in trouble. His yield was down 60%. 60%. On a 1,500-acre operation, that wasn't just a bad year. That was a financial catastrophe. He'd taken out an operating loan that spring, like he did every spring, to cover seed, fuel, equipment repairs. The loan was based on an expected yield, a normal yield, but there was nothing normal about what he harvested. When he sold his wheat, the check barely covered half of what he owed the bank. And that's when the letters started coming. First, polite reminders, then firmer notices, then a certified letter informing him that his loan was in default and that the bank would be reviewing his account for potential restructuring or foreclosure proceedings. Robert sat at the kitchen table and stared at that letter for an hour. He didn't know what to do. He thought about calling Amy, but Amy had been pushing him to sell the farm for 2 years. "You're getting older, Dad. This is too much for you. Sell while you can still get a good price." She didn't understand. This wasn't just a business. This was the Harlan name. He thought about calling Jordan, but Jordan had made it clear he had no interest in farming. He worked in tech. He lived in a condo. The last time Robert mentioned the farm, Jordan had said, "Dad, that's your thing, not mine." Claire might listen, but Claire's husband, Todd, had never liked Robert. Todd thought Robert was stubborn and old-fashioned. And ever since Sarah died, Todd had been in Claire's ear about protecting her inheritance. So Robert didn't call anyone. He sat alone in that kitchen, surrounded by 43 years of memories, and he felt the weight of his own failure pressing down on his chest. That night, Robert walked out to the barn. It was late September. The air was cool. The fields were empty. The barn was quiet except for the hum of crickets outside. He stood in the middle of the concrete floor, in the same spot where his father used to park the combine, and he felt something break inside him. He wasn't a man who cried much, but that night he did. He thought about Sarah. He thought about his father. He thought about all the years of work, all the early mornings and late nights, all the hope that this life would mean something. And he thought about how, in the end, it might all disappear because he couldn't make the numbers work. Robert wasn't the type to talk to God much. Sarah had been the praying one, but standing there in the barn, he whispered into the silence. I don't know what to do anymore. It wasn't a long prayer. It wasn't poetic, but it was honest. He didn't expect an answer. He didn't hear a voice or see a sign, but something in him shifted, just a little, just enough to keep going one more day. 2 weeks later, Robert received another letter. This one was formal. It requested his presence at the First Community Bank of Hayes for a meeting to discuss his loan status and restructuring options. Robert drove into town on a Thursday morning. He wore his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt. His hands shook a little as he parked in front of the bank. He'd been banking with First Community for 30 years. He knew the building. He knew some of the tellers. But he felt like a stranger walking through those doors. The receptionist directed him to a small conference room. He sat down and waited. A few minutes later, a young man walked in. He couldn't have been more than 30. Asian American, slim build, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a navy suit and carried a leather folder. Mr. Harlan, the young man extended his hand. I'm Marcus Chen. I'm a loan officer assigned to your account. Robert shook his hand. Pleased to meet you. Marcus sat down across from him and opened the folder. Inside were papers, spreadsheets, Robert's entire financial history laid out in numbers. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Harlan, Marcus said. His voice was polite but professional. Your account is significantly past due. You're currently in default on your operating loan, and you have outstanding payments on your equipment loan and your land mortgage. The total amount owed is $243,000. Robert's stomach turned. He knew it was bad. He didn't know it was that bad. I've been farming that land for 43 years, Robert said quietly. I've never missed a payment until last year. Understand, Marcus said, and I can see from your history that you've been a reliable client. But the bank has policies. When an account reaches this level of delinquency, we have to take action. What kind of action? Marcus hesitated. Restructuring if possible. But if the numbers don't work, foreclosure. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. How long do I have? Robert asked. I'm required to give you 60 days to bring the account current or present a viable repayment plan. After that, the bank will proceed with foreclosure proceedings. 60 days. Robert nodded slowly. I'll figure something out. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the young man's eyes, sympathy, maybe, or doubt. I hope you do, Marcus said. Robert didn't tell his kids about the meeting right away. But 2 days later, Amy called. Dad, I got a weird call from Aunt Linda. Linda was Sarah's younger sister. She said she heard you're having money trouble. Is that true? Robert closed his eyes. Small towns. Everyone knew everything. It's nothing I can't handle, he said. Dad, don't lie to me. Are you behind on your loans? Silence. Dad, it's been a tough couple years, Amy. The drought hit me hard, but I'm working on it. Working on what? You're almost 70 years old. You can't keep doing this alone. I'm 67, and I'm fine. You're not fine. Amy's voice cracked. Mom's been gone for 5 years. You're out there by yourself, trying to run a 1,500-acre farm, and now you're telling me you're in debt? Dad, you need to sell. I'm not selling. Why not? What are you holding on to? Jordan doesn't want it. Claire doesn't want it. I don't want it. You're killing yourself for a piece of land that none of us are going to keep. Robert felt anger rising in his chest. This land is your history. It's your grandfather's name. It's a farm, Dad. That's all it is. And it's not worth you losing everything. I'm not losing anything. Then why is the bank sending you foreclosure notices? Robert went quiet. How did she know that? Aunt Linda saw the letter, Amy said. She was at your house last week, remember? You left it on the table. Of course. Linda had come by to drop off a casserole. Robert had forgotten the letter was sitting there. Listen, Amy said, her voice softening. I'm going to call Claire and Jordan. We need to talk about this. All of us. There's nothing to talk about. Dad. I said there's nothing to talk about. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at his hands. They were rough, scarred. Farmer's hands. His father's hands. And for the first time in his life, Robert wondered if Amy was right. 3 days later, all 3 of his kids showed up. Amy drove in from Wichita. Claire came from Overland Park with Todd. Jordan flew in from Denver. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Sarah used to make Sunday dinners, where Robert used to help the kids with homework, and they looked at him like he was a problem to be solved. We're worried about you, Claire said gently. I'm fine, Robert said. You're not fine, Jordan said. You're in debt. You're alone. You're trying to run this place by yourself, and it's not working. I've been farming this land since before you were born, Robert said. And we're grateful for that, Amy said. But Dad, things change. Mom's gone. We're not coming back. You need to let this go. Let it go. Robert's voice rose. This is your mother's legacy. This is your family's legacy. No, Todd said, leaning forward. This is your legacy, not theirs. They don't owe you their lives because you chose to be a farmer. Robert's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for your opinion, Todd. Well, you're getting it. You're being selfish. You're holding on to something that's dead and dragging your kids into your debt. Todd, Claire started. No, he needs to hear this. If he loses this place, what happens to the equity? What happens to their inheritance? He's risking everything because he's too proud to admit he's done. Robert stood up. Get out of my house. Dad. I said get out. Todd stood up too. Fine. But when the bank takes this place, don't come crying to us. Claire grabbed Todd's arm. Let's go. Jordan looked at Robert. There was sadness in his eyes. Dad, we're just trying to help. Then let me handle it my way. Jordan shook his head and walked out. Amy stayed a moment longer. I love you, Dad, but you can't do this alone. I've been alone for 5 years, Robert said quietly. I'm used to it. She left. And Robert was alone again. The next morning, Robert made a decision. He'd sell the equipment. Not all of it, but enough. The newer tractor, the grain cart, the planter he'd bought 3 years ago when he thought he'd have helped passing the farm on to Jordan. He made calls, put ads online, posted in the local farm groups. Within a week, he had buyers lined up. The tractor sold for $42,000, the grain cart for $18,000, the planter for $25,000. $85,000. It wasn't enough to clear the debt, but it was enough to show the bank he was serious. Robert drove into town and walked into First Community Bank with a check. Marcus Chen was at his desk. He looked up when Robert approached. Mr. Harlan. I have a payment, Robert said. He handed Marcus the check. Marcus looked at it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. $85,000. That's significant. How did you? Sold some equipment. Marcus nodded slowly. This helps. It brings your total debt down to $158,000. But Mr. Harlan, you still have a monthly payment of $4,000. How are you planning to cover that going forward? Robert hesitated. I'll figure it out. Marcus studied him. With respect, sir, you're selling off the tools you need to make income. That's not sustainable. I know. Then what's your plan? Robert looked at the young man across the desk. He looked tired, defeated. I don't have one, he admitted, but I'm not giving up. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, let me look at your file again. Give me a week. Maybe there's something we can do. Robert didn't know why, but he believed him. Marcus Chen went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about Robert Harlan. He'd been working at First Community Bank for 3 years. He'd processed dozens of foreclosures. Farms, mostly. Small businesses. People who couldn't keep up. It was part of the job. The bank wasn't a charity. If people couldn't pay, the bank had to protect its assets. But something about Robert Harlan bothered him. Marcus pulled up Robert's file on his laptop at home. He went through every transaction, every payment, every loan note. And that's when he saw it. A charge. 3 years ago. $32,000. It was listed under equipment loan servicing fee. Marcus frowned. That didn't make sense. Servicing fees were usually a percentage of the loan, not a flat $32,000. He dug deeper. He found another charge. 2 years ago. $18,000. Same category. And another. Last year. $25,000. $75,000 in servicing fees over 3 years. Marcus's heart started beating faster. He opened the loan agreement. He read the fine print. And there it was, a clause about annual servicing fees. But the percentages didn't match the charges. Someone had been overcharging Robert Harlan. Marcus called his supervisor the next morning. I need to talk to you about the Harlan account. His supervisor, Jim Braddock, was in his mid-50s. He'd been with the bank for 25 years. What about it? I think there are errors in the billing. Significant errors. Jim frowned. What kind of errors? Servicing fees. They don't match the contract. I think Mr. Harlan has been overcharged by at least $75,000. Jim went very still. Are you sure? I've checked it 3 times. Jim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll look into it. I can help. I said I'll look into it. Marcus left the office, but something felt wrong. 2 days later, Jim called Marcus into his office. I reviewed the Harlan account, Jim said. You're right. There were billing errors, but they were corrected internally. It's not our problem anymore. Marcus stared at him. Not our problem? Mr. Harlan is in foreclosure because of those errors. The errors were corrected. When? That's internal. Jim, if we overcharge him $75,000 and he's in foreclosure, because of it, we have to fix this. Jim's face hardened. The bank has already addressed this. Your job is to process the foreclosure if he can't pay, not to audit old transactions. But that's final, Marcus. Marcus walked out of Jim's office and sat at his desk. He thought about Robert Harlan, about the way he'd looked when he handed over that check, the way he'd said, I'm not giving up. And Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let this go. Marcus spent the next week documenting everything. He pulled every transaction, every contract, every email. He built a case file showing exactly how much Robert Harlan had been overcharged and how those charges had directly contributed to his current debt. And then he bypassed his supervisor and sent the file directly to the bank's regional compliance officer. 3 days later, the regional office called. They launched an internal audit. Within 2 weeks, the findings were clear. Robert Harlan had been systematically overcharged due to billing software errors and administrative oversights. The total amount, $78,000. The bank issued a formal correction. Robert's debt was reduced from $158,000 to $80,000. And with the $85,000 he'd already paid, that meant Robert Harlan was no longer in default. In fact, the bank owed him $5,000. Marcus drove out to Robert's farm on a Saturday morning. Robert was in the barn, working on an old baler. "Mr. Harlan?" Robert looked up. He was surprised to see Marcus. "Mr. Chen, what are you doing out here?" Marcus smiled. "I wanted to tell you in person. The bank completed an audit of your account. There were errors, significant errors. You were overcharged." Robert frowned. "What do you mean?" "You don't owe the bank anything. In fact, they owe you a refund." Robert stared at him. "I don't understand." Marcus explained it all. The billing errors, the servicing fees, the audit. By the time he was done, Robert was sitting on a hay bale, his hands shaking. "So, I'm not losing the farm?" "No, sir. You're not losing the farm." Robert put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just stood there. After a long moment, Robert looked up. His eyes were wet. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "You didn't have to." Marcus thought about that. "Because you didn't give up," he said. "And I didn't think you should have to." Robert nodded. He stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you." Marcus shook it. "You're welcome." 6 months later, Robert's fields were green again. The rains had come back. The wheat was growing. He bought back one of the tractors he'd sold. Used, but it ran. Amy called more often now. So did Claire. Jordan even came out for a weekend and helped him fix the fence line on the north pasture. Things weren't perfect. The kids still didn't want the farm. Todd still thought Robert was stubborn. But the anger had softened. The distance had closed a little. And every few weeks, Marcus would stop by the farm. Not as a loan officer, just as a friend. They'd sit on the porch and drink coffee and talk about crops and weather and life. Robert told Sarah's sisters what Marcus had done. Word spread through town. People started treating Marcus differently. He became more than just a young guy at the bank. He became someone people trusted. One evening, as the sun was setting over the fields, Robert said, "You know, I spent 5 years thinking I was alone." Marcus looked at him. "But I wasn't," Robert said. "I just couldn't see who was standing with me." Marcus nodded. They sat in silence, watching the sky turn gold. Sometimes the people you expect to help you won't. And sometimes the people you never expected will. Robert Harlan didn't get everything back. He didn't get his wife. He didn't get his kids to fall in love with farming. He didn't get the fairy tale ending. But he got his land. He got his dignity. And he got reminded that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. So let me ask you this, and I really want to know your answer. Who was the unexpected person who helped you when no one else would? Or maybe you were that person for someone else. Tell me about it in the comments, because these stories matter. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone out there needs to hear it today. Thank you for listening.